So welcome to the lesson on budgeting and budgetary control. So this lesson comes after ratio analysis and cash flow analysis. And it's quite logical as to why that's the case. After having analyzed how liquid a business may be, how capable the business is in using its cash to settle its liabilities, in looking at how inventory can be turned into sales in a matter of time, in knowing how long payables are to be settled given this amount of assets. It's fair enough that the company should develop the skills, or the members of the members of the company or organization should develop the skill on budgeting or exercising budgetary control. What are the two main roles of a budget, Nathan?
They act they act as authorities to spend. For example, they give authority to budget managers to incur expenditure in their part of the organization, and they act as comparators for current performance by providing a yardstick against which current activities can be monitored.
Okay, so we have those two main roles of a budget. First is it the budget would tell you, would tell the organization if they have enough to spend. If a budget is approved, that means that the request is given permission, the money can really be spent for that particular purpose, or that there's really money available for that particular purpose. So the authority to spend is given. Secondly, they act as comparators for current performances. They act as gauges of how good the performance for a particular task to be accomplished at that point in time can be well addressed by the available cash that's that's in the hand of the company. That's possessed by the company organization as of a particular period. From time to time in the lesson on, or in the practice of budgeting and budgetary control, we can't help but really mention of how good the performance is at a particular point in time, because there are just so many factors that could affect this performance given a certain point in time of the operation of the business. What is a budget, Nicole? We start with that. What is a budget?
Um, ano sir, yung managing of money.
Budgeting includes management of money or resources. Technically speaking, anything can be budgeted. Money, time can also be budgeted, but in the context of this discussion, of course, we're talking about money. Management of money, correct. So there needs to be a plan, quantified plan of action. So it's a plan that shows how much is going to be spent for something and what items will be spent for, or for what items will a particular amount be spent for. So that's going to be found in that plan. Take note, the plan is quantified, not not just merely identifying items, but knowing how much goes for a particular item in the plan. And again, for a particular period of time. And once that budget has been crafted, it is good for a particular length of time, and that time is what we refer to as a budget period. Like you budget for 1 year, you budget for the month. In the store that you have, Nicole, how is budgeting practice there? Is that monthly, or what's your idea about the budgeting practice of the store operated by your family?
Weekly ata sir?
So see, that's the budget period of the family of Nicole. In running their business, she could feel like budgeting is on a weekly process, weekly interval. Whatever the allotment of time is, there has to be a budget period to where that particular budget gets to be applied. In relation to this, because of varying budgeting periods, there are also types of plans, budgetary plans that can be made. You can have a strategic plan, you can also have an operational plan, or a budgetary plan. A strategic plan or a strategic budget is made for long-term actions. It's a long-term action plan. And then we mentioned this already before last time. And then you also have the budgetary plan, which is shorter. It's a short to long term. It's concerned with preparing the short to long term plans of an organization. You have the operational plan, which has something to do with the short term or day-to-day planning process. So if you are to arrange this, strategic planning comes first, then you have operational planning, then you have budgetary planning. So long term, like for instance, if it's for an entire year's plan, in the case of Nicole, weekly, well, how will you consider that, Nicole? Operational or budgetary? Nicole?
Operational.
Operational, correct. So in the run of the business, which is going to be budgeted weekly, so that includes, of course, the purchase. I think that your company includes there, Nicole, no, the purchases. Like they'll make a listing
Yes,
of
sir.
what items will be bought in preparation for the week that follows. So that's operational by nature.
Yes, sir.
That's an operational kind of planning. So again, in terms of the order, you have the strategic plan first, followed by the operational plan, then you have the budgetary plan. In a bigger company or in a big organization, there is what we call as a budget committee. So you have a budgetary committee or a budget committee who is expected to meet regularly to review the progress of the budgetary planning process. Mostly, the budget committee would be like will be incorporated more or less in the finance department of a corporate organization. They have more or less the people who will look at how feasible the budget is, or to examine if the company or corporate organization has the necessary cash to be released in relation to the budget that's being prepared or prepared for a particular activity or undertaking of the business. Participative budgeting. Participative budgeting is defined as a budgeting system in which all budget holders are given the opportunity to participate in the setting of their own budgets. This leads to improved quality of forecast and improved motivation. When members are given equal participation in the crafting of the budget, well, of course, areas where these members belong are represented well. Meaning, we have, like if in the making of a corporate organization's budget for 1 year, if all sectors in that company are represented and participate, and the members are participating in the formulation of the budget, then no sector is not represented. So the finance department will be attended to in terms of the budget that it wants to receive. The administrative department will have its own share. The marketing department will have its own share of a budget, as there is someone to speak on their behalf. Everybody will be at least represented. So the forecast of the budget becomes better. The quality of the forecast really becomes better. It also invites motivation. There is an improved level of motivation that can be identified because they will know for themselves that that budget really goes to them as they are participating in its crafting. They would really know that that budget as it was placed at that cost or at that value, at that amount, and that they can hold themselves responsible, as well as the group where they have raised that budget, they can be also accounted as responsible for the release of the budget since they have already been part of its crafting. What are usually found in a budget manual? We're now going to talk about the budget manual, that document, which is that collection of documents which contains key information for those involved in the planning process. What are usually found in a budget manual, Nathan? For small businesses, a budget manual is not necessarily evident. Nathan.
Introductory explanation of the budgetary planning and control process, including a statement of the budgetary objective and desired results.
So strictly speaking, you would be required to put in more or less a brief of why you are asking for the budget. Like, what are the objectives of that budget? What is the need for? Why should it be released? Why should it be made? So there's like, again, an introduction which shows or which gives the budgetary committee some relevant information for the need of releasing that budget. Nicole, what other information can be found in the budget manual?
A form of organization chart to show who is responsible for the preparation of each functional budget and the way in which budgets are interested.
Interrelated.
Interrelated pala. Joke.
Okay. So there's also like a flow of an organizational chart or a flow that shows who's responsible for what. Like, who will be taking charge of this functional budget? A functional budget is a budget that is true to a particular area or sector in a corporate organization or in a company. Like, who will be assigned in this, like, who's going to be held responsible for the functional budget of the audit department, the functional budget of the HR department. So the identification of who's accountable for the making of that budget will have to be identified in the budget manual. Another information, Nathan, that we get to know, we get to identify or find from a budget manual.
The timetable for the preparation of each budget. This will prevent the formation of a bottleneck with the late preparation of one budget holding up the preparation of all the others.
Correct. So there is a timetable. Like, there is an expected time by which that budget is actually hopefully received now by that area or sector in the organization. And that it has to be really communicated beforehand so as not to also stress the department that is going to release the budget. An ambush of a budget request cannot merit right away a good approval from whosoever approves that budget. That is why it is better to prepare it ahead of time. Nicole, next, what other item can we find in a budget manual?
Copies of all forms to be completed by those responsible for preparing budgets,
Correct.
with explanation concerning their completion.
Correct. Regardless perhaps of the area where you belong, there will have to be forms that are going to be filled out. Forms will have to be, but perhaps that's not really the practice of all companies or organizations or businesses. In your case, Nicole, who controls the budget or who does the budgeting?
Si Mami lang po.
Di dadan lang na kay dili enough ang usa. Ayaw kay maugar po dayon. Automatic subtitles, ma'am, English translation. For a while, for a while. Ah. Again, the question that I raised earlier, Nicole, is who does the budgeting in the business that's run by your family?
Mommy, sir.
Uh, especially
My
that
mother.
it's a small scale kind of business, so it does not necessarily have to go through the rigorous process that's found in our module. But if it were in a bigger setup, then especially in the corporate world, then strict requirements of this sort will have to be really observed. I can recall in one of the in the many movies that I've seen involving businesses or when there's a corporate setup, the budget will have to go through a lot. In my experience of having made a budget request, it it, it really goes through a lot of it goes through a lot of processes and a lot of heads. So Nathan, give me another kind of information that we get to identify next to the copies of that need to be filled out or all forms to be filled out. What other information can we get from a budget manual?
A list of the organization's account codes with full explanations of how to use them.
Of course, companies have their, in my experience, I haven't noticed, and when I prepared a budget request before, or when I made a budget for a particular activity in a previous school, I haven't really made one that has organization codes. But perhaps there are codes that are quite applicable to other organizations, probably codes pertaining to that area or sector in the company where that budget applies, or codes when it comes to kinds of activities. Probably they have their own. Nicole, another information that we could get.
Um, Information concerning key assumptions to be made by managers in their budgets. For example, the rate of inflation, key exchange rates, and etc.
So you have these information that should also be identified. These information are so significant because whosoever looks at the budget from the budgetary committee can kind of validate that there's really a good reason why that budget is set at that particular amount. Without these information, it just might lead to questions coming from the budgetary committee. Like for instance, they might ask, why is it that the cost of supplies that you are preparing, that you want to use, is at this rate? Why is this 12% higher than last year's budget? That just might come out. Unless, of course, it's already provided. Like the budgetary manual would say that in the year that passed or in the year that followed, there is an increase of this percent in the inflation rate, or the inflation rate reached this percentage. Thus comes the significant difference between the amount of the amount that's reflected in the budget from the previous year and in the amount of the budget that's reflected in the current year. Lastly, you have the name and location of the person to be contacted concerning any problems encountered in preparing budgetary plans. The person, of course, who has prepared it will have to be identified, because that person is the one that will have to be contacted should there be any question or doubt or more concerns, more elaborations that need to be cleared out or provided in relation to the budgetary plan that's created. In the making of a budget, we need to be also open to the possibility that there is such a strong limiting factor that kind of restricts the success of the overall budget. A limiting factor is a factor which is in scarce supply and which stops the organization from expanding its activities further. For instance, the organization's activities will really be limited. A possible example of a limiting factor would be facilities, your equipment. How can that affect the budget that you'll create? For instance, you are into a business that prints shirts, prints t-shirts, and then you've received a request to do a printing of shirts for 300 people, 300 persons, only to find out that you have a limited number of equipment and machinery. You realize that the request is supposed to be accomplished in 2 days. With your own equipment and machinery, you can just accomplish 200 shirts in 2 days. Since you are supposed to cater to 300 shirts, what will you do? Will you wait? Will you rely only on your own machinery and equipment? What will you do then, Nathan?
One. Um, Relay?
What will you do, Nathan? Nicole, what will you do, Nicole?
Ano sir, pwedeng bumili ng machinery
That's another
or
one.
ask help
See?
for other
Go.
company.
You can, one option is you buy or you do an additional purchase of an equipment or machinery.
Mas,
That's
yes sir.
that's going to require one
Then
budget. The other option is
ano sir, pwede ka
Persons.
makipagkontrata sa ibang company.
Employee.
correct. You make some arrangements with other companies, and that will lead to the creation of a budget where that reason has to be clearly stipulated. Why suddenly there is a budget for printing with other companies? Because you have such a strong limiting factor, which is your machinery and equipment. See, that's a very big possibility. For instance, Nathan, no? You are into the business. This is for Nate because Nicole got the correct suggestions earlier. Like for instance, Nathan, you are into plants. You are a plantito. And then, you are actually a seller of plants. Only to find out that Nicole wanted to purchase this plant from you, like 50 variants of this plant, yet you only have 30 variants. What will you do?
Contact other suppliers
Correct.
that Nicole will buy from
Correct.
other companies.
Or if you want, Nathan, you can contact them and then you purchase them from those suppliers so that you'll still be the one who's going to provide these plants to Nicole. And then in the records of the company, there just might be a question. Why is it that Nathan contacted another supplier? Because his records show that the number of available plants is a limiting factor. That he needed to contact other suppliers in order to complete the order placed by Nicole, the customer of Nathan, the client of Nathan. So that's how limiting factors work. That's how strong they are to affect the budget that you are creating. Question so far? If you go to the third page,
Wala po.
there is a good comparison between the manual system in making the budget and a computerized budgetary planning system. What is from your perspective, from your points of view, which one do you find more appealing to use? The computerized one or the manual system? Nathan. Nathan. Oh my God, you all froze again. Go, Nathan.
What's it?
If you are to choose between the manual system and the computerized budgetary planning system, which one would you choose?
Computerized.
Why? Why, Nathan? Nathan? No, Nathan's internet. What about you, Nicole?
Ano sir? Mas madaling gamitin?
Which one would you prefer?
Mas madaling
I'm putting
gamitin
it there and I'm giving you the chance to explain.
ano sir? Manual.
Why? Go. It's all right. Why?
Ano sir? Because I think mas ma-handle ko siya kapag manual.
See, that's actually
Ma-handle
because
ko yung pag-budget.
just because a computerized budgetary planning system is available doesn't mean that everybody will go with it right away. I respect that opinion, Nicole. You might feel like you'd be able to handle it more if it's on a manual system. And that's, of course, really possible. There are really others who would prefer that the system of budgeting be done manually because that's where they could reflect immediate changes right away. Immediate adjustments can be placed right away. That they need not rely on a system, a computerized system, to do the changes. In the absence of that computerized system, they could still proceed with their budgeting as they've been accustomed to the manual system. Nathan, what about you? What's your choice again?
Computerized.
Why?
For me, it's convenient to like it's sort of for me arrange way to gather your budgetary records from your company.
So for you, it comes out to be a more efficient way to arrange and organize systematically items in a budget. Of course, that's also free for you to express. There's also such a thing as what we call as a master budget. Whenever I think of a master budget, I'm always reminded of the budget that we had in the previous school for the graduation practices. Think of it this way. The master budget looks like this. There is a sector. Wait, I'm not sure if it's in my phone. There is a sector that there is a particular document. It's a document that shows how much we can actually spend for an entire activity. I'm trying to look for the budget right now. And then that document is further divided into areas who are going to spend a portion of the entire budget. Each area is handled by a person, a committee head, and each committee head prepares a budget. Hopefully I can find the budget. I don't know where it is. Each committee head prepares a budget for that to be collated later on in a master budget. I'm looking for the master budget. I don't know why I cannot find it. Wait, where's the master budget? Where's the master budget? Wait. I know that it's just here. I'd like to really look for it because that's a clear example of a master budget. I know that it's here for a while. I really know that it's here. I don't know why I cannot find it. Wait. No, look at the master budget. I can't find the master budget anymore. I'm browsing over it over my phone because I saved a picture of that master budget on my phone. Where is that? Where's the master budget? For a while. Oh, where's the master budget? Master budget. It's not there. It's not there anymore. Oh, I lost it. It's sad. It's not there. I would not want this not to be seen. Wait.
Okay, so the name now is butane. But if I were to remove one of the hydrogen,
it's not really here.
And then replace it with
Sayang.
carbon, note that every carbon you have four.
So the master budget is like the summary of all budgets prepared.
This is now
Functional budgets prepared. And then in the approval of that master budget, more or less, that's like a go signal as well in the approval of the other subsidiary budgets that have been created. I wish I can just, I could find it so that I can show it to you. But it's not really there. The cash budget. So you have there a cash budget. The cash budget gives 4 possible cash positions. There are 4 cash positions that you can address with the creation of a cash budget. For instance, if there is a short-term deficit of cash, you can, because of the creation of a cash budget, you can arrange a bank overdraft, or you reduce debtors and stocks, you increase creditors. If there is a long-term deficit, you can raise long-term finance, such as loan capital or share capital. This action is known because you have created a cash budget. If you have a short-term surplus, Your cash budget could tell you, could suggest that you invest in short term, or you increase debtors and stocks to boost sales, or you pay creditors to get cash discounts. The fourth cash position is if there is a long-term surplus, to where you can expand or diversify operations and even replace or update fixed assets. So again, the four cash positions that you have there are four situations or conditions that can be, four concerns that can be addressed by the creation of a cash budget. And when I say addressed, you can reduce the negative effect of these cash positions. You can turn these cash positions into something beneficial to the organization by the creation of a cash budget. But of course, there are given management actions. So those are the management actions that are suggested to you. The format of a cash budget. It is said a cash budget has no definite format. Let's be reminded of that. Regardless of the format, these three important items should be there. The first one, there has to be a clear distinction between cash receipts and cash payments for each control period. That needs to be really identified. You need to have a clear definition of what events included the receipt of cash and what events talked about the release of cash. That one. The second, a figure for the net cash flow for each period. Then lastly, the closing balance for each period. These three important information should be there, whatever your format is of a cash budget. And important reminders, depreciation is not a cash flow. We just had depreciation earlier. Depreciation is not a cash flow. Rather, it's a natural tendency for the value of an asset to be reduced in the passage of time. Allowance must be made for bad and doubtful debts. It's like this. When customers owe you an amount, meaning you have a receivable, that's what we term it. A customer owes you an amount, that means that you have a receivable. Recognize a portion of it and put it on record that that's the portion that is doubtful for collection. We term that as allowance for doubtful accounts or bad debts. Leave an allowance. Anyway, if that bad debt or doubtful account has been settled, you just have to do the necessary deductions. Closing of values. Questions? Nicole? When you did,
Wala na po, sir.
Nathan, di ba you had a business during the pandemic, during the summertime, the summer break, the plant business?
Just summer ato, sir.
Summer?
Ay.
How did you go about with the budgeting plan of that?
Wala man, sir. Like, kuan lang. Post lang dayon.
Yeah, because it was on an online basis, no? Okay.
Lahi.
In the case of Nicole, as she shared it earlier, the practice of budgeting is done by her mother. And I think there's just only one Nicole, no? Only she does it.
Whether it is a straight alkane or a branched alkane, your parent alkane will consider.
Ano po yun, sir?
Is it only your mother who does the budgeting aspect of the business that your family is running?
Your parent alkane is maintained.
Yes, sir. Pero minsan, tumutulong din po ako.
Okay, that's good. But because the store is not relatively big compared to other stores in the city, so it won't necessarily take so many people, or it will not necessarily involve so many people, or that the process of budgeting will not necessarily be that complicated.
And since this is an alkyl group, this is propyl.
If there are no more questions, then I think we can call it a
This is 2-propyl.
I think we can call it a day. So goodbye and thank you, grade 12 Nathan and Nicole. Goodbye.
Goodbye and thank you, Sir Sim.
Goodbye and thank you, Sir Sim.